hello, can I just check, how are we doing? Because I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I've just been having the best day, and I want to take an opportunity because I have the stage now and y'all have to listen to me for a while. Can we give a big round of applause to the organizers and sponsors and all of you of this conference for making this possible? Can I hear it? Y'all make me so happy. Thank you. I'm going to be fiddling with this the entire talk. Anyway, it is a joy to be here. It's my first time in Malaga. I'm so excited to be here at this event as well. But let's get right into it. So, I was in the Vienna Freelancer Slack group when I saw this message pop up. I have a client looking for a React Native dev. Remote, freelance, good rate. I'm sorry, every time I read this, in my head I start singing the song, like hearing it in the music of, do you all know that song that goes like, I'm looking for a man in freelance. A man in finance, trust fund. What a slip of the tongue. Anyway, could end up being a retainer situation. And I thought, well, cool, I'm a freelancer. I love trying out new stuff. Let's give it a go. So just to clarify, the stack of this application was React Native and TypeScript. And the thing I love about being a freelancer is it somehow over the years has given me the confidence to be like, sure, I'll try out TypeScript. How bad can it be? If you're not familiar, React Native is like React, but for writing mobile apps and also web apps. It's a little weird. But I took it on, I onboarded, and then I took a look at the code base. And it had been quite a while since the last commit had been made. In fact, so long that when I tried to run the iOS, the mobile app of iOS, it gave me an error that said, could not find iPhone 6 simulator. Now, I don't know about the rest of y'all, but the iPhone 6 did not come out last year like I feel it does. But it has actually been more time since the iPhone 6 and now than the original iPhone and the iPhone 6, which makes me feel really old. Anyway, just sharing some of my pain. I couldn't run the Android build either. I don't know, something about Java didn't work. Cool. So I thought, hey, I'll just have to upgrade it. Easy peasy. So I went into the package.json file, and I started just bumping some numbers and see what happens. So just to clarify, when I started working at this, the React Native version was 55. And at the time that I tried upgrading it, the React Native version, the current one, was 74.1. That's almost 20 versions behind. And so I thought, okay, cool, I'll just bump it to 74, no problem. But guess what? Something broke. React wasn't working anymore. But no problem. I'll just upgrade React to the latest version. But something else broke. And then I tried React DOM and upgrading that, and something else broke. And it started feeling like, do y'all have these at home? Do you have cable boxes? Can I get a show of hands? Do y'all have cable boxes? Oh my God, there's so many of you. I love you all so much. Don't let the haters deter you. I promise that you will someday need that Nokia 3310 charger you still have. You gotta need it. Anyway, for the purposes of this presentation, it didn't feel so much like cables, but more like knitting, like yarn. Just to clarify, I am not a very good artist. These are not all my images, but the very messy ball of yarn squiggle there, that was me. Anyway, it started feeling like my yarn was all knotted and tangled and just a giant mess. So in order to tell you a little bit about what we're going to go through today, it's not so much about what the best practices are for managing dependencies, but rather my favorite ones. I'm just going to show you a little bit about what I've learned over the years in all of this time. But in order to do that, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about me. Hi, my name is Carmen, pronoun she, her. As explained earlier, I am the co-founder of the Bad Website Club. We are an initiative for helping folks get started in tech. We're actually starting our next free boot camps in January. Learn HTML, learn CSS, learn JavaScript. Come join us, it's fun. And by day, I am a developer educator at Directus, but I'm a big believer in our work outside of our work and what we do in our spare time defining us even more as humans. And you can see some of the other stuff I do here. I've coached children to code. I used to be in the Mozilla Tech Speaker program, which sadly no longer exists, but it was so meaningful for me. And currently I'm organizing Queer.js in Vienna. I don't have stickers, I'm sorry. But I think it's so important to take a step back and remember how wonderful it is that we're all here, we're all a community, we're all learning from each other, and I just want to say thank you so much for being part of this with me. Anyway, cheese is gone now. Let's talk about dependencies, because I don't know about you, but sometimes I take dependencies for granted. I'm just like, oh yeah, throw that in. But then I kind of take a step back because like, I'm putting code that I've into my project that I don't really look at. And the thing is, dependencies have their own dependencies, don't they? Have you all seen this meme before, like the heaviest objects in the universe? Node modules are a lot of dependencies and very, very large. Somebody made a game which is like node module Katamari. If you're not familiar with Katamari, it's like a game where you play as a little guy pushing a ball, and as you roll over objects, your ball gets bigger and you can pick up even bigger objects, and they did that with the node modules folder. And it's super cool. There's a lot of code involved in this. And I don't know about the rest of y'all, but it sometimes feels really precarious when I'm messing around with my code, to the point that it feels like a very weird game of Jenga where I'm like, I better not mess any of this up. And this is a continuous process, isn't it? Now I'm going to do that cool thing where like I bring in a quote from a very famous person. Leonardo da Vinci says, "Art is never finished, only abandoned." I want to really, really stress the fact that I tried so hard to make 100% sure that Leonardo da Vinci actually said this, and this wasn't one of those things where they said, oh yeah, Mark Twain said that, sure. Anyway, so I'm going to show you a little bit of these lessons that I've learned over the years. The first is understanding dependencies, because there's a lot of types of dependencies, it turns out. When we work on a day-to-day basis with JavaScript dependencies, we're thinking of dependencies and dev dependencies. And I'm going to be honest, at the beginning I kind of took all of these for granted. I'm like, oh, well, I'm a developer, let's put it in dev dependencies. But the difference is important. And essentially, dev dependencies don't get included in a production bundle. Asterisk. Most of the time. There have been issues in open source where some bundlers, as an accident, did in fact include your dev dependencies. But those get fixed over time. And the important thing to bear in mind here is that your dev dependencies are those that help build your project. Think of things like Typescript, linters, and other stuff like that. So these get bundled into something called direct dependencies. But then, when you leave the box open, then there's space for transitive dependencies. And what those are is what makes the node module the heaviest object in the universe. It is the dependencies that your dependencies depend on. Try saying that 3 times. So, are there other types of dependencies? Why, yes, there are. There's also peer dependencies. And if you're not familiar with these are dependencies that our package is compatible with. Let me give you an example. Let's say I am writing a package called Fancy Charts, and it is compatible with the package chart.js. What happens when our users, or the people who use Fancy Charts, install Fancy Charts, is that chart.js will be installed alongside. It's not a peer. It's not a direct dependency. It is a peer dependency. And I think the last place to look at dependencies for ourselves and understand them better is this big boy. Has any of you ever opened package.lock.json other than to solve merge conflicts? Look at that, please. 18,000 lines. What package lock does is define for us which exact versions of the dependencies we're using are declared and will be downloaded when someone else wants to work on our project. So cool. Now we understand where dependencies fit with one another a little better. Next, I want to talk about, as I emphasized a little bit before, the importance of community. Because I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I sometimes forget how much the tools that I use help me and are developed by people so much smarter than I am. For example, one of my favorite tools is Upgrade Interactive from Yarn, and the equivalent for NPM would be NPM check updates. And I don't know if you've ever seen this, and it's going to be difficult to ask to lift your hand if you have. Let's see. A couple of y'all. Great. I mean, that means I get to introduce it to y'all. What Yarn Upgrade Interactive does and all of these other tools do is show you, hey, these packages could use an update. These ones really need an update, these ones don't, and this is how it all looks. And this was developed by folks like us who have had similar issues. Specific to React Native, and this is one of my favorite things in the world, is the React Native upgrade helper. Which doesn't sound like that big a deal, but let me tell you, when you're upgrading React Native, you depend not just on React Native. Not only do you depend on React, but also Apple and Google. And they like to update stuff and break stuff often. So having the ability to see not just what the difference is and what steps you can use to upgrade are, but it even shows you a diff of all of the configuration files. And this was developed by folks. I think it's so helpful. But what about when I get stuck? How do I solve my problem? And if you think about it, like as software engineers, that's a big part of what we do, isn't it? It's solving problems like this headset. Cool. And I'm sure it's happened to y'all that you try to do an NPM update or something, and then you get a whole bunch of errors. And I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I stopped reading at could not resolve. I'm like, well, neither can I. Yeah. And you start looking at, okay, this is broken and that is broken and I can't run anything. What I love doing in situations like that is break the problem down. Now, y'all might think like, duh. But I find it really helps me focus. Like, I'm not going to worry about Android for now. I'm just going to worry about iOS first. So then I look at iOS and I look at break that problem down into even smaller problems. Adapt to auto-linking. Don't know what that means, but it's fixed now. Fix compiler errors, done. Broken UI elements, fixed, one at a time. Bugs introduced by upgrading, fixed. Fix compiler warnings, fixed. And then I'm done, and I'm not going to look at iOS anymore, because it's time for Android. And then I do the same thing, one by one, but really laser focusing on that one error at a time. But the problem is I do need to go back eventually because something else broke in iOS. It just happens. You're kind of running around and fixing little problems, but I really think of it as trying to fix one small problem at a time. And it kind of reminds me of a video game, a very old video game called Greenhouse. Has anybody heard of it? Any hands? Am I that old? I'm not as old as this. I'm a little younger. I am vaguely younger than that. But I love this. I played it on the Game Boy when it got remade. Anyway, what you're doing is going around, focusing on one plant at a time as the bugs try to attack it. See, bugs? Software? Anyway, and what I like about that is that you're really, really staying focused on just one task at a time. And that's how I solve problems. But what about tools? Oh, we software developers really love our opinions on tools, don't we? Oh, do I use Yarn? Do I use NPM? Do I use PNPM? Oh, by the way, I never questioned what the P and PNPM stand for, but I looked it up for this presentation. It's performant. So if you take one thing away from this presentation, the PNPM stands for performant NPM. Anyway, and there's loads of tools here that are super helpful for finding out, for example, with NPM why is dequal? I like dequal. Why is the qual being used? And there you can see down your dependency tree which dependencies are like, oh, I need to qual. And this helps you find out which dependencies you don't need anymore. But why do that yourself? That's manual. Why not use knip? Knip? Knip. I like knip. Anyway, knip is great. It's exactly this tool and making this automatic for you, which is all well and good. But what happens when we have very, very large code bases? Do we like monorepos here? Can I get a show of hands? Oh, I saw one go very fast up. Cool. Awesome. Yeah. So if you're not familiar, monorepos are a way to have multiple code bases in one repository that share dependencies. And there's a lot of tools for facilitating this. For example, there's Yarn workspaces. You can have a repository with your website, with your package itself, multiple packages, and have them all in one place. And you can use Yarn workspaces to manage the dependencies across that monorepo. And as a big fan of using your own tool to build your own tool, Yarn actually uses workspaces to build Yarn. Fun fact. And there's also tools that do that. It's not just Yarn. NX. Are we fans of NX? Do I see any hands? Cool. I see a couple. Fantastic. Same thing. Facilitating working on your monorepos and more. CI, a whole bunch of other stuff. I don't know. I love how many tools like this there are. But what about when you really need to tell your users, hey, it's these dependencies and these dependencies alone? NPM actually has something built in for this, which is called NPM shrink wrap. Think of it as a package lock that you publish. And you might think, well, why on earth would I need that? I'll give you an example. When you build a CLI tool, which is something that somebody installs and needs very specific versions of dependencies, it's a publishable package lock. But what about when software becomes stale, when security vulnerabilities happen? We have tools like NPM audit, which tells you which packages have reported vulnerabilities, and you can go ahead and upgrade those specifically. But why do that by hand when you have automatic tools? Things like Dependabot, Sneak, Renovate, all very handy things. I also want to address how big an upgrade do you make? How do I go all the way, for example, from React 55 to 74, or do I just take it step by step? For example, if I'd gone from 55 to 59, that would have added some kind of JavaScript stuff to Android. Cool. But what if I'd gone from 55 to 60? Well, now native modules are auto-linked. That's handy to have. If you're not familiar, it means that we can install packages without having to mess around with the native Apple and Google tools. And the less that I open Xcode, the better. Anyway, I decided to go from 55 to 74, and you might be wondering why. And to that I answer, why not? Actually, I do know why not. It's because you're, of course, staying up to date, future-proofing yourself, but most importantly, it's something that you're going to have to do eventually. As said before, Apple and Google upgrade pretty fast, and they tend to deprecate a lot of stuff. And I like doing these kinds of security and measured upgrades often. But don't take it from me. Take it from Martin Fowler, who wrote an article called Frequency Reduces Difficulty. And I'm just a big fan of this. If it hurts, do it more often. I feel that. Next, I want to talk about version control. I'm a Git nerd, and I love nerding out about Git stuff. And I want to introduce, have y'all ever heard of bleeding edge branches? Can I get a show of hands? Do I get to introduce it? Oh, heck yeah. So this is something that I learned about very, very early in my career, and it's actually something that's addressed in the Git book itself. And what it is a mess. A branch where you go in knowing that it's just going to be a bunch of tiny, likely broken commits. And what I like about it is that it serves as a documentation for myself to see what works. And I'm obviously meaning something that's a little bit more descriptive than, I hope this works. I hope this works. We've all done those commits. But my favorite thing about it is that you do it in such a way that it becomes easy to clean up, squash if needed, and rebase. I love rebasing. Anyway, the last thing I want to talk about is how far do we go? Because in this project, there were 72 packages. And I didn't update them all, and I didn't even update them all the way. If you're not familiar with semantic versioning, which you would hope that all packages do, you have the major version, which is API breaking. You have the minor version that introduces new features but doesn't break anything. And you have the patch versions that introduce bug fixes. And you need to figure out when to do it and how often to do it. And just because you don't do it now does not mean you're never going to do it. So, okay. We've been through all 7 things: understanding dependencies, the importance of community, untangling those inevitable knots and breaking those problems down, picking the right tool for the job, understanding how far to go in one swoop, making those bleeding edge branches, and understanding how many packages to upgrade. And if there's something that I want to leave you all with, is that it happens often, and it happens to all of us. Am I done upgrading my packages? Absolutely not. So now I'm going to do that thing where I bring in the code from the beginning, because I like to think that if Leonardo da Vinci was programming today, he would probably say, software is never finished, only abandoned. Okay, my friends, well, these are the resources I used to write this presentation. And if you missed them, don't worry. My slides are at carmenh.dev/dependency-management.pdf. And I just want to say thank you so much for, oh, hold on. Oh, my slides want to talk to you. Okay, what do we, right, okay, I do need to address one thing. So I'm more of a cross-stitching girly. But I think the metaphor works pretty nicely. I think it's good to be honest. Anyway, thank you for having me.